Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to look at one of the most iconic watches in the entire Rolex lineup. We're going to look at the Rolex Submariner, and we're going to look at two references, the 14060M and the 124060. This is sort of the last of the great Submariners, the PreCeramic model, and this is the newest and improved reference 124060 in the 41mm case size and upgraded specs and materials. Each one brings something unique and important to the table for the Rolex Submariner. They have their similarities in their core DNA and core design ethos, but they also have a lot of differences as the watch has evolved and gone through different iterations throughout the years. So without further ado, let's flip the camera and take a look at these two iconic references of the Rolex Submariner. The one on the right here is the Rolex Submariner 14060M, and the one on the left is it's called the Sub 41. It's the reference 124060. Both are quote-unquote no date variations, or as you could call them, they're Rolex Submariners. The ones with dates are actually called Submariner dates. And this is a very iconic watch in Rolex's catalog. Of course, the Submariner was one of the first dive watches in existence, and there have been a lot of evolution and a lot of changes along the way, but the core DNA kind of remains the same. Alright guys, now let's jump in by looking at the PreCeramic model. This is the reference 14060M. I guess it stands for modified. There's a lot of theories about what the M stands for, but this is the predecessor to the 14060, which in and of itself was the predecessor to the 5513. So the modified version has the upgraded caliber 3130. This particular model still has the 2 lines of text. Some of the later references have the 4 lines of text, but this is a watch, a reference that is very true to the original Submariner in size, in fit, in finish, in just general aesthetics and materials used, and we'll get into all of those details. So let's go through some of the specifications first. This model is 40 millimeters in diameter. It is 20 millimeters from lug to lug, tapering down to 16 millimeters. It's 12.3 millimeters thick and features a lug to lug of 47.5 millimeters. And you can see that there are drilled lugs here for easy strap changes. The bracelet on this watch is going to be hollow end links and is going to be a little bit more tinny, a little bit more light, but definitely a little bit less noticeable on wrist, at least compared to the modern examples that have the solid end links. The later examples will no longer have the beveling on the edges of the lugs there. That's kind of a very vintage nod back to the original references. As I mentioned, the caliber that's inside this watch is the caliber 3130 with the 48-hour power reserve and beats at 4 Hertz. This watch, just like the newer examples, has a trip lock crown with crown guards and is water resistant to 300 meters or 1,000 feet. This watch has a sapphire crystal, which is scratch resistant, but does not have any AR coating on the underside or on the top, so you'll definitely pick up a lot more reflections. The newer examples actually do have AR coating applied on the underside, so it does cut down on the reflections and enhances the clarity versus the older models. Now the bezel insert is aluminum and is 120 click, and just to give you a sample of the action, very nice and resounding clicks. This coin edge bezel is very easy to grip and is a little bit more pronounced versus the newer reference. And the bezel action on the older example is actually a little quieter versus the newer reference. And I'll give you a sample of the newer one as well, but that's just an interesting thing to note as well. And then you'll see that the clasp is actually the kind of this integrated oyster design, which I think blends very well with the bracelet. And I don't know, it's a little bit more camouflage to me and doesn't stand out as as much as the newer bracelet clasps. You can see that the clasp is completely stamped, whereas the newer ones are going to be milled. Still very solid oyster lock double folding system, so it's still very secure. You're going to have 4 positions of micro adjustment. Solid case back, as you can see. Another thing that you'll find inside the clasp is a diver's extension. So this is a very kind of rudimentary and cheap folded metal diver's extension in the event that you will actually use this watch to go diving. It's there if you need that extra travel. The indices are loomed, of course, the hour hand and minute hand and all the hour indices. And they are loomed with Super Luminova, which is a green formula and is very legible and very long lasting. The newer references have the chromalite, so that's going to be definitely a lot more bold, a lot more kind of unique in its color. But I do think that the Super Luminova gives this watch a nice glow and makes it very legible as well. So let me put this watch on my 6.5-inch wrist and give you guys a feel for how this watch wears. Now, the biggest difference between this example, this reference, and the newer reference is the way that it wears. This watch is a lot lighter, significantly lighter in fact, and the case, because it doesn't have the super case or the maxi case as it's called, just fits and melds on your wrist so wonderfully and is just a joy to wear. Even though this watch doesn't have the on-the-fly adjustability with the clasp, I would argue that it doesn't really need it because it is so light and so weightless on the wrist. And a lot of that is due to the fact that it does have the hollow end links as well. But guys, this is a really comfortable watch to wear. It just kind of integrates with your wrist and slides under any sleeve. It's a hair thinner than the newer reference at 12.3 mil thick. And I just think is a very versatile and understated watch. It's going to be a lot less shiny and blingy and attention grabbing than the ceramic newer references. I think this watch is a true joy to wear. This watch to me kind of represents what the Submariner would look like if Rolex kind of took the same path that Omega did with the Speedmaster. With the Speedmaster, Omega didn't do anything to kind of drastically change the watch. They kept the bezel, an aluminum bezel insert. They didn't do anything drastic in terms of changing the case and the dimensions. And so this reference is really kind of like the last of the great Submariners for Rolex. All right, so now that we have taken a look at the PreCeramic, let's take a look at the latest and greatest, maybe the greatest, we'll let you decide. This is the Sub 41 as it's called, and the reference number is 124060. As you can see just right off the bat, a lot shinier, a lot quote unquote blingier, but also more of a robust watch. And let's get into some of those details. So as far as the specifications go and dimensions, this watch measures 41 millimeters or a little less in diameter, about 40.6 to 40.8. The lug width is 21 millimeters and tapers down to 17 mil at the clasp. This watch is 12.8 millimeters thick. So if you guys recall, the M model is 12.3, so this one's just a hair thicker. The lug to lug distance is 48.1 versus the 47.5 on the older reference. And the sapphire crystal is a little bit less raised than the older reference. And you'll notice that on the dial versus the older reference, this watch has the maxi indices. So a lot more legible, a lot more pronounced. As I mentioned, the lume on this reference is the chromalite blue lume. So it'll be very legible and very distinctive at night. And you can see there's Rolex all around the rehaut and a coronet between Swiss and Made. Now both these indices are actually finished in 18 karat white gold. So they'll be a lot more resistant to tarnish over time. Now the biggest difference between this reference and the newer reference is going to be the bracelet. Much more solid, all solid end links and center links, and gives you that extra sort of reassurance. It just feels like a much more refined and better built bracelet. And you use the crown here, you dig your nail in to release the clasp. And right away you'll see that the clasp is very nicely finished. It's milled, it's polished, a very well made clasp. Another huge difference is the addition of the glide lock. You can see that you can actually customize the fit on the fly as you see fit, up to 20 millimeters of on the fly adjustability. So in terms of the clasp and the bracelet, this reference has it over the older reference in spades. The bezel insert is what Rolex calls Cerachrome, which is a ceramic material, very scratch resistant, very fade resistant, unlike the aluminum bezel on the older reference. Also 120 clicks. Give you a sample of the action. And like I mentioned previously, guys, the clicks on the bezel of the newer reference are going to be a little bit more pronounced than the old one. So let me give you another sample of the old bezel. It's a little stealthier. So let me put this watch on my wrist. All right, guys, so here is the sub 41 on my wrist. Noticeably chunkier, noticeably heavier. Because of that longer lug-to-lug dimension, it does overhang my wrist ever so slightly. And the maxi style kind of case doesn't seem to conform or sit as nicely onto my wrist. It might if you have a larger wrist, like if you have like a 7-inch plus wrist, it might sit a little bit better. But for my dainty wrist, this definitely overhangs a little bit more than I personally would like it to. But it's by no means a massive watch. I own the Explorer 2. I've tried on 43, 44 millimeter watches, and this watch kind of wears a little bit more like a 42, but definitely a completely different wearing experience versus the older reference. It's far chunkier, far heavier, bigger clasp, bigger diameter, bigger dimensions, boxier case, heavier materials. I think ceramic weighs a little bit more than aluminum, and then of course the solid end links versus the hollow end links. Forgot to mention the movement inside this watch. It's powered by the Rolex in-house caliber 3230. We can go into the specific specifications and all that of the caliber, but really the biggest difference is going to be the power reserve. That's kind of the number that most of us watch people really kind of care about, unless you're really far deep into the calibers and the movement technology. 70 hours versus 48 hours. Both beat at 4 Hertz. Both are superlative chronometer certified and are accurate down to -2 plus 2 seconds per day. All right, guys, so that's a look at these two very iconic, very awesome references in the Rolex Submariner catalog. It's really hard for me to choose which one I would prefer. I'm gonna say, the newer reference has a more solid feel. It definitely is more reassuring in its build quality and its bracelet design and construction and clasp. And the materials are also improved with the Cerachrome bezel insert, the AR coating on the underside of the crystal, as well as the chromolite, which is a little bit more legible, a little bit more distinct. But I gotta say, there are definitely big upsides to the older reference as well. I mean, it's as close to some of the vintage examples as you can get in terms of wearing experience, in terms of materials used, in terms of aesthetics and design. If Rolex came out with a new and improved 14060 with all the modern materials but the same proportions, that would be a resounding hit in the watch world. But I don't think things look so good on that subject. Rolex is a little bit more about moving forward rather than backwards. It's a really hard toss-up. I might choose the newer one just because of the fact that it has that extra reliability and peace of mind, but it would be very hard for me to say definitively which one is the all-around better watch. But with that being said, guys, I hope you found this video informative, entertaining, and insightful. And if you have any questions, let me know, and let me know which one you guys would choose of these two watches. Do you own either or both, or thinking about owning one of them? let me know and let everyone else know in the comments below. Thanks as always for your support. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care and have a great one.